Okay, Anthony, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. As you have quite rightly said, I'm here, or Liz and I are here to introduce you to the latest Royal College consultation on Schedule 3 about the future of veterinary nursing. It's a huge opportunity to help us define the future direction and the role of RVNs in the veterinary industry. This is a great opportunity for the whole industry to have their say. The consultation is currently live. It does run until the 7th of June, so please complete it now or as soon as you possibly can. And it's been conducted by the Institute for Employment Studies. Just to reassure everyone, it is anonymous, so we want people to be very open and honest about we want to tell them about, people to tell us about what they do now, current work done now by RVNs, and what might be done in the future. We really do want your views about what the future should look like, and we would encourage everybody to think outside of the box. I think it's fair to say that change is always constant. The profession and the veterinary industry certainly looks very different today from when I qualified 30 years ago this year. It certainly looks very, very different place. And that rate of change is increasing. It's going to look very different, I have no doubt, in the future, in the next 5 years and 10 years. And we want to help define that future. Let's make a contribution and help define what that future looks like. There are a lot of changes. There are external factors, whether they're political, that may have effects on available manpower. I know people are talking about Brexit at the moment. Possibly more importantly, is there are huge technology advancements and developments in the veterinary industry. And that will inevitably mean that all our roles are going to change slightly. It creates disruption, but it also will create huge opportunity. So I'm going to hand you over to Liz now.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, David. So I think
trying to forward the slides. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so consultation has already launched, as David said. We've had a huge response already. Over 10% of our veterinary nurses and student veterinary nurses that we've sent the consultation to have responded, and already 5% of veterinary surgeons have contributed to that. And that's only on day 3. So I am looking forward to seeing some of the results that we get out of our consultation. So the purpose of my presentation will be to just to tell you a little bit more about how the consultation fits into the whole review of Schedule 3, but also just to explain to you a little bit maybe about our history, what we've been up to, and what Veterinary Nursing Council have been up to in particular with our CVS, as it's been quite a busy time, and as David said, things are kind of changing quite rapidly, and maybe just closing a little bit more on just exactly who is in practice, what is a veterinary nurse, and then I'll hand back to David to explain a little bit more about the detail around how we delegate and where we appropriately delegate. So our Royal Charter came into force in spring 2015, and that particularly clarified the role of the college, but helped us to modernise some of our regulatory functions. And that part was a huge part of that was for veterinary nurses. We, of course, became our profession in our own right, and we were regulated as professionals in the UK. Part of the process was the removal of the old list of veterinary nurses, and we moved to a single register, which is much clearer for members of the public. We now use our post-nominals, RVN, but in return for taking on the privilege of having the status of professionals, we signed up to have a minimum requirement of 45 hours over 3 years for our CPD, but also adhering to our code of professional conduct, and then also accepting that we could be removed or suspended from that register if warranted, which would mean we weren't entitled to undertake work under Schedule 3, which is obviously a very similar process to that of veterinary surgeons. So moving on to our next slide, she says, David. Okay, so title of the veterinary nurse. So we moved on in August 2015 very quickly, decided that we wanted to have a go at protecting our title of veterinary nurse for the many reasons that we all understand. And we had about just under 37,000 signatures, which was over 4 times what was needed to get a response from the government in response to our petition. Rather sadly, they did come back saying at this stage they wouldn't protect it. But what they did do was said that although they had a deregulatory agenda, that they suggested that we worked a little bit further with DEFRA to work out how we could strengthen and bolster the role of the veterinary nurse, which actually fed in very nicely into our work for the Veterinary Nursing Futures project and Schedule 3. And there's just a little screenshot there of our video, and it's quite nice at the moment. We've obviously got the Veterinary Nursing Awareness Month, and there's a lot of veterinary practices still sharing that video, just showing the role, the wide role that veterinary nurses that do. Next slide. So March 2016, our CVS Council formally agreed to reform its governance, and a number of those changes took part of the council, but one of those was the composition and number, and in particular having 2 veterinary nurses will have formal seats on council, which I think is a particular historic moment for veterinary nurses. It was certainly something that was very long awaited and probably reflects a little bit more the changing views from a less patriarchal relationship that we had to reflecting a little bit more how we work in practice, in that we work alongside veterinary surgeons. Next slide. So again, very busy. July 16, we launched our Veterinary Nursing Futures report. It was launched at the Veterinary Futures Summit. That report looked at veterinary nursing and where we wanted to be in 2020. That came through a process of across-the-country meetings. We talked to both veterinary surgeons, veterinary nurses, educators about kind of the opportunities and challenges, and also where we wanted our veterinary nursing future to be. That had a number of ambitions, and one of those key ambitions was that we wanted to reform and to have a look at Schedule 3. If you are interested or want some little bit more detail about the Veterinary Nursing Futures report, it is still up there. If you have a look at, if you Google Vet Futures website, the Veterinary Nursing Futures report is on there for more detail. Next slide. So again, being super busy, September 16, the Schedule 3 Working Party was launched, and we very quickly realised that there was quite a lot of areas to examine, that we weren't, although we have anecdotal information about what goes on in the profession, we weren't entirely sure that we had our good concrete evidence. So we asked to do a consultation looking at what veterinary surgeons and also veterinary nurses and student veterinary nurses thought about Schedule 3. We've also asked to have a look at the guidance. We're asking for your opinions on, although we give the information, is it clear enough? Do you want more detail and things? But also during that process, obviously Brexit occurred, so we need to consider the impacts that Brexit may well have on our Schedule 3 and other regulation and things that we have. Next slide. Schedule 3, just to be clear, Schedule 3 is actually an amendment to the Veterinary Surgeons Act. It came into force in 2002 and sits within the Veterinary Surgeons Act. And I think one of the things that's really probably worth trying to make clear is that it's the right of the veterinary surgeon to delegate. It's not the right of the veterinary nurse to undertake Schedule 3. So it's very much such as it's permission for the veterinary surgeon to delegate to veterinary nurses. And there's kind of 2 parts to that which are quite commonly missed. We're very clear on the minor surgical procedures that don't involve a body cavity, but we quite often miss the key words there, medical treatment, which is what we do on an absolute daily basis. Blood sampling, catheterization, those sorts of things are very much medical treatment. The levels of supervision are also kind of set out within Schedule 3, and that's something I'm going to leave David to explain to in a little bit more detail. But I think probably something I'd really like to get across to you is that it's really important that veterinary surgeons only delegate to student or to registered veterinary nurses. Next slide. So who's who in practice? Practice has changed quite rapidly. Our team is expanding, and we don't all wear the same uniforms, and they're not clearly identified now. So I think it's probably worth just having a think about who we've got in practice. Obviously veterinary surgeons, nurses and student nurses are generally very clear, but we also have an additional layer in practice which are called lay staff or support staff, and they have a varying number of terms: animal care assistant, veterinary care assistant. Some of them are qualified, some of them aren't, with varying levels of expertise. We obviously have reception and practice management and administration, but just to be clear that Schedule 3 very much sits within the clinical team. The next two slides are, apologies for being a little bit wordy, they very much are just to give you some detail and maybe some further reading in case you're unsure, but just to make sure that we know that a veterinary nurse is an RVN when we're talking about veterinary nurse. That's somebody whose name is on the register. And that we have a enrolled list of student veterinary nurses, and that's what permits student nurses to work in practice under Schedule 3 with levels of supervision for purpose of their training. And the second slide just explores that a little bit further and talks about that we've signed up for our Code of Professional Conduct. And as I said, that student veterinary nurses are able to train in practice. So again, I'm going to hammer this one home, sorry, that student veterinary nurses or RVNs are the only people that are permitted to carry out Schedule 3 procedures. We do have quite a lot of inquiries through the college about veterinary surgeons that are visiting the UK as to whether they can work as veterinary nurses whilst they're gaining their RCVS registration, and that isn't permitted, and we are quite clear about that because they're not veterinary nurses and they're also not registered as veterinary surgeons. The other part, just to say, is no matter how experienced our lay members of staff is, they are not veterinary nurses and we can't delegate to them. If you're unsure about level of whether we can delegate or not, it's very easy to pop onto the RCVS website and go on to check the register and then just put the person's name in, whether searching for a vet or a veterinary nurse. Now, David and I were going to put a little funny joke in here about I was going to delegate to him to carry on to the next slide, but we couldn't kind of think about whether that was very professional or appropriate. So how we're going to leave it is that we're working as a veterinary the RCVS veterinary team today. So I'm going to hand over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for those introductory comments and real explanation about the team and the makeup of a modern veterinary team. I'm going to say a few words really now, a few words of explanation, or provide clarity on what delegation actually means. In a nutshell, the vet, as Liz has said, is overall responsibility for animals under their care, and must be the employer or acting on behalf of an employer if they're going to delegate. On top of that, the veterinary surgeon also has to be satisfied that the RVN or the student veterinary nurse that they're delegating to is competent to carry out that work. That is a very important aspect of it. You can't just delegate stuff if the registered veterinary nurse that you're delegating to isn't competent to do that work. So that's what delegation means. The RCVS guidance also goes on to talk about the levels of supervision. So when you delegate some work, there are responsibilities about what is actually direction, what's supervision, and what is direct and continuous supervision mean. So when we use the word direction, it means that a veterinary surgeon has instructed the person as to the activity but isn't necessarily present. Supervision means that the veterinary surgeon is present on the premises and able to assist, but as the slide explains here, direct and continuous supervision means just that. The veterinary surgeon is present and giving the RVN or the student their undivided personal attention. It's the vet that's entitled to delegate if they want to, if they're satisfied that the RVN is competent to carry out the activity that they are delegating. There's also a responsibility on the RVN to feel competent as well. It would be a ludicrous situation where a vet wanted, or an unacceptable situation, where a vet delegated a task and the RVN didn't feel competent to carry out that task. So the two levels, or two people in this decision-making process when a task is passed on to somebody else. So if a vet isn't comfortable about what they've been asked to do, then they have a responsibility as a professional to say so, and not just to go ahead and do it. So what is a medical treatment? What can be delegated? And a huge number of questions are always raised. Can a veterinary nurse do this? Can a veterinary nurse do that? We have not and will not be producing a definitive list. It's actually about using your professional judgment in every situation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few minutes. It's about using your professional judgment in every situation and looking at the competencies of whether it's appropriate to delegate or not. If we produce a definitive list, the world is changing so very, very rapidly that that list will be out of date almost as soon as you'd finish writing it. The world is changing very, very quickly, and every situation is slightly different. So a list could never satisfy that. A list of rules is too prescriptive. The onus is on the veterinary surgeon and the veterinary nurse to use their professional judgment. The situation, the competence, everything in and around it to be able to make that judgment. This slide, paragraph 18.7 of the supporting guidance to the code is the wording that we use. It gives an illustration of how it's written in the supporting guidance. But what that slide is actually saying is that all circumstances are different. A judgment must be made on a case-by-case basis. For example, if you're putting a drip into an elective preoperative case, that's certainly a very different scenario to another case where you might have to put a drip in and there are emergency circumstances and there are question marks about whether that animal needs fluids. And in that situation, it's a different situation, and the veterinary surgeon may not wish to delegate in those circumstances. So where the procedure and or the treatment is less familiar, where it's perhaps an unfamiliar species or condition or likelihood of complications, or it talks here about owners' wishes. So owners must certainly never be misled. What we're not saying is that when a vet or when an owner brings an animal in, we have to state to the owner that the vet will do this, the nurse will do that, then the vet will do this. That would be a ridiculous scenario. But we must never mislead an owner if they've made a specific, especially if they've made a specific request. So to give a little bit of comfort on what at first seems quite complicated, I think the thought process is, if you're at any stage questioned by the Royal College on what you've done, on the delegation, on the tasks that were performed, could you justify why you made that decision that you did? Would others think that decision was entirely reasonable and have made the same decision? So when you're talking about delegation, those are the thought processes that you should be going through. Now we're talking about student veterinary nurses. What does that mean? Is it any different to delegating to a registered veterinary nurse? Well, there are actually some subtle differences. Again, it must still and always must be a procedure that has been directed by a veterinary surgeon. So it's been delegated and directed by a veterinary surgeon. But in every case, the treatment or surgery is supervised. So there must be, the veterinary surgeon must be on the premises, or the veterinary nurse must be on the premises. You can't direct something and not be able to assist should you be required to do so. And written here is that certainly with any surgery, then it has to be direct and continuous supervision. Once again, the veterinary surgeon is the employer or is acting on behalf of the student veterinary nurse. So just to reiterate, there is no legal dispensation for a vet to delegate medical treatment or minor surgical treatment to a non-RVN. No matter how experienced they are, there is no delegation in the Veterinary Surgeons Act to delegate any tasks to a non-registered veterinary nurse, to an ACA, under any circumstances. But just for clarity, it's very unlikely that Royal College would take any regulatory action if it's not in the public interest to do so. So there will be some circumstances, if decisions are made, where a procedure is delegated to a layperson, because to reiterate, if you're not an RVN, then you are in law a layperson. If you do delegate any task, then it has to be reasonable given the circumstances. It doesn't put the animal at risk. It's what a normal owner would be reasonably expected to be able to do. And if we look at the bottom comment on this slide, ensure any such decision is documented. So I hope that gives a little bit more explanation about delegation, what it means, the role of the vet. The animal must be under their care, what delegation actually means, what the levels of supervision and direction actually mean, and then a little bit of more clarity about delegating to non-RVNs. And I think this last slide, or the slide on the screen at the moment, is very, very important. Documenting and making reasonable decisions. There is a lot more information out there, sources of advice, sources of reference. And so if you are ever in the decision when you're not sure, or having to make a decision when you're not quite sure what to have to do, then there's refer to the guide. There's the guide, or the code is on a free app, and it's useful to have it as a reference point. Or if at any stage you're still not sure, please call the professional conduct department at Royal College. You'll find them to be very, very helpful. And regularly we try and provide updates to give people more clarity around this area where there is still, I know, confusion out there. I'll hand you back over to Liz now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the consultation.
Thank you, David. I think probably with my role with the Royal College, I probably would like to think I know Schedule 3 and the code quite well. But as David said, the sources of guidance are invaluable, and I do have the code, rather sadly, downloaded onto my phone. So if there's any areas and things that you're unsure on, they've got lots of little hyperlinks on which will take you to the supporting guidance and get a little more detail. And I do use that one quite a lot, so definitely worth downloading. So just to go back to our review of Schedule 3, the consultation is a part of that. We have a working party put together which has got members from the veterinary profession, but also the dental profession, having a look at their work, and vets and veterinary nurses. And part of the review, as I said, is the consultation, but also we've got other parts that we've decided we want to have a look at. So already we've started to look at how veterinary nurses and similar counterparts overseas are used, as to how they are regulated, but also what kind of roles that they do within practice. We will also have negotiations with DEFRA. What we will do is we will have our consultation and we will have our working party review, and that will also feed into the Veterinary Nursing Council, which will also go to the RCVS Council, and then we will go to DEFRA. So please bear with us. This is obviously quite a large part of work, and may take some time. I think probably the other bit to say is that this Veterinary Surgeons Act is quite complicated, and Schedule 3 is just a part of that. So being a part of an act, we may be limited as to how many changes we can make within an amendment. What we are doing already is having to look at our legislation as a whole, and we do have a review group, and that will look at the Veterinary Surgeons Act to make sure that it's fit for future, but also that it serves our public professions and also our animal welfare for the future. So as I said, do bear with us. Next slide, David. Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think part of the consultation is just to kind of have a look at, as I said, what's going on in practice, and David said we also want you to be very honest, but I think we also need you to kind of have a little think about it a little bit more widely. We know that the world is changing rapidly. The veterinary profession is most definitely changing. We've got considerations around Brexit, so we're already talking in terms of, we think we have workforce shortages, but will they be worsened through a post-Brexit world? We've got concerns around our access to medicines and also our legislation. Technologies are rapidly changing. I don't think we remotely could have foreseen how we would have used mobile phones just a few years ago. But already in the States and things, we're seeing smart cat litter trays being produced, Fitbits for dogs, data loggers, those sorts of things. And that may well affect how the veterinary profession works, but maybe how we use veterinary nurses in the future as well. Veterinary surgeons are certainly an area that they're wanting to increase their specialisation, but we're also seeing that with veterinary nurses. They're going on to do their advanced diploma, but there's certainly nurses out there who are doing the vet tech specialisation. They're travelling to America to do that, but also going on to do qualifications at master's level. And I think already we've seen changes in how the nursing world has worked within. If we look at the human model, it's very common nowadays to see nurses as a first point of contact, or even a specialise in their own right. The other thing probably to mention to you, or to have a think about, is that this isn't just us. This is a global thing. Certainly OIE OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, are already having an increasing focus on how they use paraprofessionals, which is the term that they may use for their equivalent of veterinary nurses. And we've got common views on technology, veterinary nursing specialisation, and they're already beginning to question whether that more routine work should be delegated to veterinary nurses. Next slide. So the consultation, as I said, David explained to you, we want you to have a look at what you're doing now, what you're delegating to nurses to do, what you'd like them to do. We'd like you to be very honest. As I said, it is very confidential, so please tell us exactly what's going on out there so we can have a good, honest view of it. But also we want you to have a little bit think about the future of the profession. The areas that we will ask you to consider are about, are you doing Schedule 3? So in the further comments bit towards the end of the consultation, are you doing it? Yes or no? But if you're not doing it, why not? What are the barriers to that? Is that you're not wanting to do that? Is that your veterinary surgeons don't wish to delegate, or that you feel that it's not in your area of expertise? I think the area of advanced veterinary nursing is something quite exciting to explore. As I said, we've got nurses who've gone on to do further levels of qualification, but does that affect how we're going to have our Schedule 3? Do we want to have a Schedule 3 where only nurses that hold an advanced qualification can do certain procedures? And when you think about that, that sounds quite sensible, but we don't restrict our veterinary surgeons to that. What we do is we allow them to have their professional competence and judgment to say, am I acting in my area of competence? But that's certainly something I think would be useful to explore. Our guidance on Schedule 3, do we explain it well enough? As David said, we're not going to give you a definitive list on what you can and can't do, because that rapidly changes. And again, it very much comes back to whether the veterinary surgeon is happy to delegate, but also whether the veterinary nurse would be acting in their area of competence. And the big brave bit we want to do is a bit of blue sky thinking. We want you to have a think about not what veterinary future looks like, veterinary nursing looks like now, but what will it look like in maybe 5 or 10 years. There's some quite interesting discussions around various parts of the country about veterinary nurses' role in TB testing. We know that the model for that has changed, and certainly for businesses that can be quite challenging now. But do we want to use veterinary nurses more to explore their areas of interest? Certainly people that come maybe from the rural communities, maybe of area of interest. Dentistry, that one pops up commonly. Do we want veterinary nurses to be extracting? We know that veterinary nurses like doing the dentistry. I certainly know the BVNA course that they're currently running was a sellout, and a sellout very quickly. So an extremely popular area. But dentistry has changed. We've got nurses looking at local blocks, at dental radiography, those sorts of things. And certainly within the human dentistry, veterinary technicians have really taken hold of dentistry and developed it a little bit further. But we've got imaging, it's something, an area to consider. We've got nurses running MRIs and CT scanners very successfully. Maybe a little bit more edgy, veterinary nurses in prescribing, is there areas of sort of routine anthelmintics and those sorts of things that we should be thinking whether should we prescribe within a limited area as we do with the human world. So blue sky thinking, please. Be brave, tell us what you think, tell us what's going on. As David said, it closes on the 7th of June, so you've got a little bit of time. We have already, as said, hit 10% for veterinary nurses, 5% for vets in only 3 days. But we really do need to know what's going on to help us form our opinions. And I think that's me. So final slide is Ben Myring, who's at our CVS. If you have any thoughts, questions about the consultation, anything you want to bring up with him, then do please get in touch.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks very much, Liz. Just before we start with questions, a couple of announcements to make. There is a question time in Blackpool on Monday, and I have in the chat box put in the Eventbrite link if you want to go to that. Obviously ask questions, things like the Schedule 3, but obviously other areas that you can also talk about, like Brexit. So that registration is in there. So if you're in the Northwest or a little bit further afield and you'd like to go and quiz Royal College about, you know, this or other things, then you can come to the question time, which is being held in Blackpool, but all the details are in that chat box. And it's also on the front page of the Royal College website if you just want to look at that. Second point, I thought while we had quite a few people on, just wanted to, you know, express our sadness at the death of Lord Soulsby. And that was announced yesterday. He was our a member of the Royal College. Obviously, he was president, and then also was our first Lord in the House of Lords. So just really wanted to pass on our sympathy to his family, but also members at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons as well.
Anthony, thank you. And if I may, just again, I had personal close contact, particularly when I was representing the profession at BVA with Lord Salisbury, and certainly he's been a fabulous friend to the profession, and the doors that he has opened, the debates that he has put the veterinary profession right at the heart of in government. He made a huge contribution throughout his career, and a very sad loss, a greatly respected man.
And also president of the Royal Society of Medicine. I think he was the first ever vet to, and only vet to have held that role, I believe.
Yes, that's right. An early advocate of One Health.
Very much, very sad. So we've got a question here. If either or of you want to answer, and we'll see if any more questions come. Delegation points from Sol saying statements regarding VN qualified, but speaker states competent. So technically they do not have to be competent, just qualified.
Well, legally they have to be qualified. They have to be listed. They have to be an RVN to be able to carry out any of these delegated tasks. But then it is a professional responsibility of a nurse to say, to be able to state that they're competent to do it, just the same way that it is a veterinary surgeon. So, for example, if I have worked in equine practice my entire career, legally I'm allowed to do some very advanced small animal surgery, but is that in my area of competence? No, it's not. So I have a professional responsibility, as an equine veterinary surgeon, to say I'm not competent to carry out small animal orthopedic surgery. I think that's quite a good illustration that if you are a registered vet nurse and you've been asked to perform a task, but it is outside your area of competence, the nurse also has that professional responsibility to say, no, I'm not competent to do that. I've got to work within my area of competence. So, yes, you have to be qualified to do any of these procedures, but you also then have a personal judgment to make on, is that within your area of competence? Does that help answer the question?
I found that very clear. Hopefully Sol did as well. You can always comment if you've got something you want to add to that. Would just comment, obviously this is being recorded. You may have colleagues who on a Thursday afternoon are busy doing other things like looking after emergencies or doing operations. So this will be up on the site by tomorrow. Do direct people, because I think it is such an important area that there are so many possibilities, for nurses within this consultation. It's a real opportunity for you to, further enhance your professional aptitude and standing, within the veterinary industry, isn't it, Liz?
Very, very much so. I think probably something I'd really like to try and make sure that we get across is that obviously we're about this veterinary nursing, but we really want to know what veterinary surgeons think about this, because as we said, Schedule 3, it's the right for veterinary surgeons to delegate. But the world has changed so rapidly, and veterinary surgeons are very, very supportive of veterinary nurses. And when you speak to them, a lot of them are quite frustrated that they are having to do some of the tasks which they feel that a competent, registered, obviously veterinary nurse, they would most happily delegate to. And certainly I spent some time in the summer at some of the charities which are extremely busy, and also referral centres, and those nurses are working to a really high standard. And now we're looking within the VN Futures about workforce issues, and we're concerned that maybe we don't have enough veterinary surgeons, and that we are very good at training veterinary nurses, but we're not very good at retaining them. So maybe we need to be a little bit braver now and say now is the time just to have a look about how we use our workforce as a whole. Maybe we need to use our animal care assistants a little bit more, get our veterinary nurses to nurse more and to support our veterinary surgeons, and let veterinary surgeons work in the areas that they're interested to do, and maybe that their skills are a little bit better valued in terms of finance, but also in terms of, sort of professional satisfaction. I think it's probably quite timely that we have a rethink about everything.
Just to echo what Liz has said there, I mean, I work for Blue Cross as clinical director, where we employ some fabulous veterinary nurses. They're immensely valuable to our organisation in the delivery of veterinary services. And we're looking very closely, or we would like to look very closely at what more they can do working within Schedule 3. And it's about not only having first and foremost the right legal framework, but then it's about how do you give them confidence and competence to do that. Because none of this is about asking people to do anything that they don't feel competent to do. It's about how we move forward, how we give people the training and confidence when we work out that really great model on what veterinary nurses can do more of.
Yeah, I think. Sorry to interrupt. I think one of the things that we get thrown back at us is that we're trying to ask veterinary nurses to be mini vets, and that's absolutely what we're not doing to do. We're trying to encourage veterinary nurses to develop their own field and to explore the area and advance the area of nursing, but also just to make sure that we're very good at training them to a great standard, and then we don't use their skills, which does seem a little bit daft, but also frustrating. And I know that we have lots of reasons that maybe our veterinary nurses leave the profession, but certainly terms of frustration is something that's frequently cited both from vets and veterinary nurses.
Sol's just added a little supplementary to that. So he said, yes, thanks, that's helped with the answer. But the vet doesn't have to necessarily check competence if the RVN says yes.
The vet has to be satisfied so they have to be personally satisfied that the person I'm asking to do a job is competent to do it, and the nurse has to be satisfied that they're competent to do it. So if somebody walked into the room and you were asking them to put a drip in, or I don't know which procedure to pick, but if you had, as a veterinary surgeon, wanting to delegate a task and you had absolutely no knowledge of that RVN and what they were capable of doing, it was their first morning of their first day of work and they've just joined you, it is unreasonable as a veterinary surgeon to say, I'd like you to do this and walk out the room and absolve all responsibility. You have to be satisfied yourself that they're competent to do it, because in the very unlikely event of questions being asked at Royal College or at a disciplinary case, were the judgments you made reasonable? And so I think that's the key question, always to be able to ask yourself or answer for yourself is, I delegated, I made a decision, and these were the judgments behind it, why I made it. I knew this, I knew that, I knew this person, I knew what they're competent to do. They felt comfortable doing that particular procedure. It was legal, and I knew that everybody was happy and comfortable about what the expectation was. I think that's the key question always to ask yourself, whether you ask yourself those same questions as a veterinary surgeon when you start a procedure. Am I competent to do this? And if you're not, then you're starting to get yourself into potentially deeper water if questions are raised.
It's common sense in a sense, David, isn't it? You know, you get a new vet nurse starting in your practice, you'll almost keep, or you'll have somebody, if it's not you, another vet who's keeping an eye to make sure that they are competent, because when it's all said and done, you don't want them doing things that's going to harm, the pet that people are looking at. So you're there looking over their shoulder at first to make sure they can put a drip in, and if they can't, obviously you help with training, or perhaps they're not the right person to be doing the job.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, Anthony. And so the same way, if you employed a veterinary surgeon, on the first morning they walked into the door, you wouldn't just say, could you do this very complex procedure? I've no idea whether you've done one before. I've no idea whether you can do it, but I'll see you at tea time. That isn't how you have to be happy that people that you're working with are competent to do the tasks that you are asking them to do.
It's supporting your team members as well. You don't want to put people into difficult positions, do you?
No.
I think that's probably an area where we have kind of seen where vets and veterinary nurses work very closely together. Certainly our more recent graduates have only ever gone through university with the support of RVNs, and see the kind of the benefits that they will bring to practice. Again, when we're talking of sort of levels of competence, I mean, sometimes putting a catheter in, it's not uncommon for a vet or a veterinary nurse either way to kind of pat back to each other and say, do you know what, you're going to be better at this. It's your kind of area of of competence that you're better at. And I think that's where we're seeing that those team skills, there could be a huge difference between an experienced nurse and a new grad veterinary surgeon. So it's what's best for the animal and who's acting in the best area of competence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know the practice in Leeds that I used to visit for dermatology, that Jill there was far superior to me at getting drips in, so I would often bow to her greater authority. If there are any more questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. Do let people know about this, because I think it's such an important area. Obviously that consultation is open until the 7th of June, so there's lots of time to do it. Just, Liz, remind me, how will people find that on the website?
Sorry, I missed your point. The bit about the consultation.
Yeah, how do we find where to go to?
So your consultation, you will have had individual emails sent to you. They are very specific to either a veterinary nurse or to a veterinary surgeon or a student veterinary nurse. So you will have to go back through your inbox. But they will be sent from somebody called Dillis, and the company is IES.
Right, okay. So
individual links through an email.
If people are struggling with that, obviously go and look in your spam folder. If you're still struggling and you're desperate to do it, I would presume give Ben an email or a phone call.
Absolutely, yes. We'll back them back to Ben. Yes, I'm sure Ben will get them up.
Ben will be pleased about that.
He'll be very pleased.
We've got one more question which I'll read out. It's if I can teach an owner to carry out a treatment procedure, then I am okay to ask an experienced lay member of staff that I have trained and know they can do it, so long as I'm there. For example, injecting medication, checking heart rate, respiratory rate and temperature.
Going back to the slide that talks about this, yes, you are allowed to ask a lay member of staff, so in other words, a non-RVN, to carry out any procedure that would be reasonable to ask an owner to perform. So it wouldn't be reasonable to ask an owner to perform an intravenous injection. It wouldn't be, but we do ask owners to perhaps inject their pet with insulin, for example.
Yeah.
So it is reasonable to carry out those tasks that are, if you're satisfied about their competence, you've documented it. What it isn't reasonable to do, or what you cannot do, is carry out minor acts of surgery under any circumstances, and those more major tasks that are part of that are acts of veterinary surgery.
I think again, just to be very clear on that, the area that David touched on earlier as well is about owners' expectation. So owners will probably expect a veterinary surgeon does everything. I think we think that we're pretty sure that clients assume that anaesthesia is genuinely monitored by a veterinary surgeon. So I think if you were to explain to an owner whether they were happy or were aware that a non-registered person was treating their animal, I think that may be a tricky conversation to have. But I think one of the things that the RCVS are very clear in is that we don't want to be a barrier to animal welfare. So there are areas and concerns about whether we've got veterinary nurses and things to do night duties and our level of support. But I think, as David said, it's all about having that good, clear judgment that you're able to reasonably justify your actions and more importantly, you record it. But I think it's very important. We have to think, how would we feel if we were in our shoes, if we were in the human world?
Yeah, it is. That is a very complex area, an area where there's a lot of discussion. I mean, if there is the animal welfare and the public interest is not an issue, then Royal College are unlikely to take any action. There will be circumstances where an emergency surgery is required or cesarean, and at that time of day, an individual, in order to carry out the procedure, you may have to ask somebody, a competent member of staff, to give some sort of assistance. What you can't have is a business model that says at all times of day, I don't bother with having any qualified members of staff to help me. But in these exceptional circumstances, it was in the animal's interests, it was in the best interest, and I justified the decisions that I made, that I asked a well-trained member of staff to assist me with this particular part of what I was doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is dare I say, if people use common sense in a lot of this, that is going to be probably the right thing to do, isn't it? But as you say, if it's the consistent thing that you're having anaesthetics being monitored by, a layperson, then that clearly is not right.
Anaesthesia is a complicated one, and I think if you've got any areas of concern, I would go back to professional conduct about it. But at the moment, the law stands is that anaesthesia is still the responsibility of the veterinary surgeon. So the assistant is monitoring and reporting back to the veterinary surgeon. That's certainly some work that, as a college, we've done some work on and will make some changes on. But again, it comes back to owner expectation, justification. I think David's explanation of on a day-to-day basis, that's probably not acceptable. But if you have critical cases or emergencies, then absolutely we do what's best for the animal.
And just to go back to the consultation itself, please I want everybody to feel confident that they tell us what they are doing, what they're not doing. So while there's some that we've been talking about, the grey areas, this is what this consultation is about, to bring clarity to those grey areas so that we can really help define the way forward. So we do want to know what people are actually doing out there. And
it is anonymous as well, of course.
Yes.
So this gives people the opportunity to say, what they want to say as well.
Absolutely. That's what we need to know, what's really happening out there, rather than working from anecdotal information all the time.
Fantastic. There aren't any more questions. Just again, wanted to remind people, if they want to come to the Royal College question time, that's in Blackpool on Monday. Buffet at 6:30. Chris Tufnell will be there, who's the president of the Royal College, along with some of the members of the Royal College team. And, I will be there. So hopefully we'll see some of you there as well. Will you be there, Dave?
I'm there, Anthony. Yes, I'll see you there.
And likewise, I should be there
good.
Also.
Well, that's very good. That's made me absolutely certain I'm going to come now.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.